Imagine her as legend portrays her. Silks and jewels, courtiers bowing, a seat of honor beside the king, servants at her command, music filling the hall. Hold that picture. Now set it aside entirely. The reality was something else. If you were to shadow a queen through her actual day in a medieval castle around 1200, your first overwhelming impression would not be splendor, it would be surveillance. Observers, always. When she woke, when garments were brought, during prayers, at meals, walking corridors, sitting still. Any moment she might try to find solitude, it evaporated. She existed constantly in view. A medieval queen occupied the grandest chamber, the softest bedding, the most elaborate wardrobe, the head position at feasts. Yet she owned almost no seclusion, scarcely any autonomy, almost zero control over her own schedule or destiny. Not a gentle awakening for her. Instead, curtains torn back forcefully, cold water waiting in a basin, women stationed and prepared to transform her body for an occasion she had not selected. She consumed no meals in quiet. The entire assembly watched her expressions while she ate. She did not move through passageways freely. Sentries bowed aside, servants averted gazes, and every threshold opened by another's hand. Her spouse was not her selection. The children she bore were not simply hers, they were state resources. Her physical form served the dynasty, not herself. The imposing fortress that projected power from the distance functioned less as residence and more as confinement, its stone foundations rigid and unyielding. We will accompany her through one full rotation, from chamber to courtyard, from courtyard to chapel, from chapel to throne, through the weight of obligation and danger that saturated every hour, ending as darkness falls behind her locked chamber door. A door that never truly assured privacy. This narrative rejects the fairy tale version of queenship. It presents queenship as it actually existed: constraint, obligation, and the struggle to endure. Long before the queen's consciousness emerges, the fortress bristles with activity. Beneath, in the cooking spaces, embers of fire come alive. In animal enclosures, a handler whispers to a beast. Along the ramparts, a sentry redistributes his stance, eyes scanning the pallid pre-dawn. Outside her bedchamber, an attendant waits on a wooden bench, attentive for the smallest sound. Her chamber represents the finest quarters allocated to a female inhabitant of this fortress, yet it remains fundamentally a space carved from stone. Shuttered against wind, the cold infiltrates nonetheless, seeping through cracks and fissures, climbing up from the foundations. Embers from the previous night's fire have diminished to residue and a fading radiance that warms nothing beyond arm's length. A woven hanging depicting hunters adorns the stone, fungal insulation masked as decoration. Insufficient, yet necessary. The air carries wood smoke, rendered fat, mineral dampness, and the stale closeness of an enclosed space since dusk. Her sleeping platform, elevated on wooden supports, surrounded by heavy drapes that conserve warmth, layered with linen and wool and fur, qualifies as luxurious by the standards of the period.
By contemporary measures, it remains merely a mattress in an unheated chamber within a stone structure, perpetually monitored because the room is perpetually inhabited. At the bed's far end, an attendant sleeps, not as guest, but as cluster. A queen does not slumber in isolation. Attendance continues through slumber, darkness, the hours when most people imagine belonging only to themselves. Upon the queen's stirring, everything mobilizes. The attendant rises first. The storage chest opens quietly. Linens are withdrawn. A second attendant enters from the passage, having kept vigil there, moving to the fireplace where she kneels and breathes life into embers, feeding them kindling, coaxing flames from ash. A third pulls back the bed drapes, permitting whatever faint illumination the shutters permit. A vessel arrives, a pitcher beside it, a cloth arranged on its rim. The water chills. It has been transported by hand up staircases. Some portions may have been warmed over flames, but infrequently. She washes face and hands in liquid that would cause modern discomfort. The fabric is coarse. The surrounding atmosphere surpasses the cold she has vacated.
Her attendants maintain proximity, eyes forward, because looking away contradicts their assignment. No serene dawning, no leisurely stirring, no solitary drink, no stretching without observers. From her initial conscious breath, she is accompanied, supervised, and prepared to embody the monarch the court requires. Then the dressing phase commences, and it is not swift. First, a fresh linen shirt against the torso, then supporting garments, then the main gown, usually wool, occasionally finer material if the day involves guests or ceremonial functions. The fabric demands substantial weight. Garments accumulate. An overtunic covers the gown, a clasp cinches the middle. Footwear exceeds anything most kingdom dwellers will ever possess, though it remains inflexible, frigid, engineered for appearance rather than comfort. Then, the element most people misunderstand. Her hair receives combing, positioning, and concealment. In 1200, a wedded woman of status does not display hair uncovered. A linen head covering, or wimple, renders it invisible, secured with pins, fastened so that what was once something belonging solely to her, something intimate, becomes an object requiring orchestration by other hands each morning. By the moment she steps through her chamber threshold, she has undergone cleansing, clothing, layering, pinning, review, and endorsement. The actual day has not yet started. Most contemporary people would desire to return to their bed. The castle's barriers offer more than refuge. They guarantee constant observation. To comprehend a queen's circumstances around 1200, you must understand her route to the fortress. She determined none of it. Consistently, royal marriages were contracts, not for affection, not for compatibility, for political alliances, for territorial gain, for harmony between families or lands that required reciprocity more urgently than they required her agreement. She may have been pledged since childhood. Her introduction to her husband might have transpired days before the ceremony. She was possibly transported beyond territories, across waterways, away from everyone she recognized, to dwell in a castle previously unknown, among people speaking an unfamiliar language she labored to comprehend, bonded to an individual whose personal preferences remained secondary to political calculation. This represented standard practice, anticipated, unquestioned. Her importance was transparent to observers. She signified the connection between two authorities. She embodied the succession of the reign in her biological capacity. She was tasked with generating successors, sons particularly, and her inability was not regarded as tragedy. It became a political catastrophe. Her position remained provisional from the instant she arrived. Security meant sons. When she bore them, her household received resources, her influence expanded, her communications occasionally penetrated the king's awareness. Failure, or infant mortality, triggered recalibration. Murmurs permeated the castle. Supporters became guarded, the king's concentration elsewhere. When monarchs redirect focus, queen's circumstances shift alongside. A designation that elevated her position above virtually each other female in the realm was accompanied by bonds both concealed and irrevocable. She traversed passageways only with authorization. Relocation demanded sovereign permission plus military accompaniment, the purpose requiring court sanction. Creating written communications necessitated knowledge of scribes owing their primary allegiance to the crown, secondarily to her. Receiving guests underwent examination. Establishing deep connections fell under scrutiny if they resembled political maneuvering. Her companion women offered friendship, yes, but functioned as observers, chosen for familial reliability, aristocratic ties, and eagerness to communicate observations. A queen faced uninterrupted consciousness in public view, no instant of pure, unattended reflection. Someone continuously inhabited her space with a purpose transcending companionship. Her physical self underwent inspection in manners that would appall modern sensibilities. Confirmation of conception required collective verification. Illness held political implications.
Changes in position relative to the sovereign became common knowledge prior to the subsequent gathering. The demarcation between private existence and public function, it had no material form. She inhabited a construction meant to deploy her, shield her contingent on her utility, and monitor her ceaselessly to guarantee her permanence as useful. A queen in 1200 did not govern, she endured, and endurance was veiled in fabric and called honor. What observers encountered in a queen was vestments prior to physiognomy, intentional. In an epoch predating imagery, broadcasting, without distance projection of authority, fabric represented the communication. The queen's garments articulated everything courtiers required before language commenced. The gown constituted the base. A queen's dress was constructed through stratification, each layer bearing significance, material and abstract. Against flesh, a linen undergarment, pristine, ivory, substituted as regularly as the household managed. Linen approximated ease in medieval dress, with fineness telegraphing wealth instantly. Thread density indicated ranking.
The primary dress, elongated, floor-grazing, contracted at the torso, descended loosely. Wool dominated quotidian utilization, yet not peasant grade. A queen's wool received tones, profound scarlets, purples, emeralds, pigments commanding premium rates. Particular dresses integrated superior substances, Eastern silk or combinations balancing temperature with luminescence responsive to flame and candlelight. An outer layer, surcoat or cloak, acted as insulation and exhibition simultaneously. Fur trimmed it, vair, miniver, ermine, contingent on season and ceremony. Fur represented not ornamentation, but warmth, rank, and statecraft materialized. At the midsection, a clasp or banded ornament occasionally suspended with a satchel, ring assembly, or spiritual trinkets. The clasp served practicality, however remained inherently observable. What dangled from a sovereign lady's clasp communicated her concerns meriting constant proximity. Then the head covering. A queen in 1200 concealed her hair, unchangeable expectation. A married woman of distinction concealed her hair with linen or wimple obscuring the hair and framing the visage.
Superior fabric, meticulous arrangement. Identical consequence, hair, a marker of personality and distinction, vanished, managed, rendered suitable. The covering communicated, she belongs to the court, she belongs to her husband, she belongs to the structure governing her. Adornments finalized the declaration. A diadem crowning the temples, fastenings securing the mantle, bands encircling the digits. These represented not indulgences selected for pleasure, they were mechanisms of governance. A clasp bestowed by a supporter, a ring marking genealogical association, a circlet reinforcing this woman's proximity to the crown, surpassed only by the king himself. Dressing meant weaponry. Each dawn, the queen's form shifted from personage into proclamation. Stepping past her chamber threshold, her dress, her head covering, her adornments, and her deportment transmitted simultaneously. The court interpreted her presentation the way commanders decipher terrain, searching for indicators, fragility, connection, trajectory. The heaviness was literal. Accumulated cloth, constrained dress, pins anchoring the head covering, weighted, cloaked exterior. She bore status as flesh and fabric load every waking moment, and nightfall's relief was singular to the few private moments the fortress permitted. Apparel transcended mere garments. It was the initial boundary of her captivity. Exiting her chamber, the queen's day did not unfold into autonomy. It opened into a calendar serving everyone besides herself. The initial necessity was devotion. She departed her chamber through a monitored passageway, accompanied by her attendants, toward the religious space. Stone passage, chilled air, servants, gazes lowered upon her transit,
sentries withdrew. The chapel entrance opened for her, not by her, candlelight reflecting from stone. At the sanctuary, a priest positioned and prepared. The ritual was brief yet obligatory, not because conviction was negotiable, but because sovereignty in 1200 depended on religious sanction. She was queen because the Almighty sanctioned it. The calendar thus started by honoring divinity, whether or not her consciousness felt that reverence that particular morning. The genuine labor commenced subsequently. A queen in 1200 was not merely decorative. The picture of a queen languishing in a tower is fiction constructed centuries afterwards. Authentically, she controlled. She superintended segments of the residential structure. She sanctioned expenditures for her personal quarters plus attendance. She obtained reports regarding supply situations under her management. She administered the feminine residences, textile spinning, needlework, material conditioning. She supervised records, or had scribes maintain them, and reviewed them personally. Should the king be absent, fighting, conducting diplomacy elsewhere, traveling through his territories, her responsibilities intensified. She potentially wielded authority in his non-presence. She might address emissaries. She might determine matters affecting the castle plus neighboring territories. She might produce communications authenticated with her own seal, documents carrying legitimacy from the crown's foremost deputy. Yet even with the king resident, responsibilities consumed the hours. She encountered visitors, spouses of other magnates, ecclesiastics, messengers bearing tributes or appeals. Every meeting involved strategy. Every interchange underwent documentation. She could not extend excessive warmth to the unsuitable guest or insufficient warmth to the correct one. Hospitality was not humanitarian impulse. It constituted governance conducted with refreshment and provisions. She maintained maternal presence, though differently than contemporary understanding. Noble-born children of that epoch were reared through nurses, educators, and domestic officers. The queen witnessed her offspring assuredly. She oversaw development and positioning. Nevertheless, the continuous physicality and detachment that moderns consider standard parenting was not her professional framework. Her children were dynastic investments initially, individual persons secondarily, with institutional construction reflecting this. She might traverse the fenced garden, assuming the fortress contained one, a modest tract within barriers, cultivated with medicinal plants, perhaps decorative specimens, encircled entirely by stone boundaries. Practically the singular outlet to open space numerous monarchs experienced regularly. Still accompanied, a guard stationed at the threshold. The garden meant ventilation within confinement. She consumed midday provisions in the hall or, climate permitting, in her personal suite. Provisions exceeded anything most realm inhabitants would encounter, yet watching contaminated it. Servers, consumption quantity, verbalization, emotional expression. The household processed her responses alongside the food. By afternoon, she had prayed, administered, greeted, superintended, eaten, and measured her speech for extended periods. 50% of the day stayed ahead. The evening feast in the principal hall represented the most prominent act of a queen's day. The hall populated gradually. Meal platforms were arranged, seating transported, rushes dispersed, releasing herbal fragrances and antiquated residue. Torches blazed along surfaces, distributing uneven illumination across timber and stone. Vapor thickened toward the ceiling. Servers navigated carrying sustenance, pouring vessels of fermented grain, transporting platters of roasted flesh. At the assembly's far conclusion, on the elevated section, the principal table, the queen positioned herself beside the king. Absent the king, she directed the central seat personally. Supremely ranked, she overlooked the assembly. The assembly returned observation. The food demonstrated medieval prosperity. Cooked livestock, mutton, swine, wild game if hunts proved productive, sustenance from superior grain, fish on faith-mandated days, preserved dairy, pastries, cultivated provisions when harvests permitted, imported beverages from territories distant, spices crossing lands before reaching this surface. Pepper, cinnamon, aromatic roots rationed because each fragment signified expense. Portions appeared sequentially, vessels arrived in arrangement, beverages were supplied. A drink attendant observed her container, replenishing prior to request. A butcher sectioned the meat. Preliminary tasting occasionally occurred. Not necessarily verification against toxins, but the formality itself projected vigilance and rank. Opulent presentation, yet each elevated action signified strategy. Where the queen directed attention registered. Enthusiastic communication with a guest's spouse, recorded. Disregard, recorded equivalently. Excessive laughter, discussed. Quietness, interpreted. Tactile contact with the king indicated approval. Absence indicated removal. The queen did not merely partake, she enacted performance. Below the elevation, others consumed and observed. Swordsmen, scribal workers, administrators, servants. Attention oscillated between dishes and the upper section. Her physiognomy underwent examination similar to atmospheric monitoring for shifts. Even the substance she ingested contained meaning. A queen dining heartily recommended wholeness and equilibrium. A queen consuming sparingly recommended affliction, sorrow, or, hazardously, maternity. And royalty's maternity never remained contained to private experience. It constituted the preeminent political circumstance the queen's frame could produce. Following consumption, entertainment might transpire. A performing musician wielding a stringed implement, a composition, a recitation. These entertainment sequences genuinely occurred, standing apart as uncommon instances when the atmosphere relaxed. Yet examination persisted. Enjoyment was tolerable. Extravagance was unacceptable. Surfaces were cleared, the hall gradually emptied. Beasts settled beside the hearth. Helpers organized cloth. Flames diminished. The queen withdrew the way she had emerged, monitored, examined, never genuinely without attendance. Even at ceremonial consumption, she never truly escaped. Behind magnificence, behind textiles, feasts, and chapel rituals, fear persisted. Persistent. Underlying. Sharpening when darkness arrived, pursuing her through passageways, halls, gardens, back. The paramount terror surrounded reproduction. A queen existed to birth offspring, not optional, requirement. The succession depended on descendants. The realm's continuance relied on succession. Her existence, her retainers, her sway, her life hung on her capacity to generate sons who lived. And reproduction, then, was lethal. Medicine consisted of botanical expertise, spiritual intervention, and experimentation. No surgical experts, no pain management, no sterile implements, no supplemental circulation, no capacity for intervention if delivery triggered catastrophic failure. A queen labored in her chambers, supported by nurses and her attendants. Barriers shut, shutters latched, atmosphere thick with candlelight and fragrant herbs intended for comfort. Supplications, holy objects approached. The ecclesiastic remained beyond. Numerous queens survived, numerous perished. The likelihood was concrete and commonly known. Every inhabitant comprehended it. Every gestating monarch perceived that the chamber might represent her final observation. Assuming the mother persisted, the child might not. Juvenile demise, then, was catastrophic. Fever, sepsis, frailty, affliction. Offspring perished in quantities incomprehensible currently. A mother producing 6 may bury half prior to age 5. Each demise was anguish and political defeat fused without separation for individual processing. The fortress did not arrest celebration. It reallocated. Beyond reproduction, distinct peril persisted, political. She occupied the apex of a court in perpetual flux. Authorities maneuvered, magnates pursued or undermined her standing. The sovereign's confidants assessed her sway and determined whether it benefited or imperiled their circumstance. Excessive prominence, excessive visibility, excessive proximity to particular supporters? Retribution. Insufficient prominence, insufficient connection, excessive distance from the sovereign's attention? Erosion. Conspiracy lacked theatrical drama. It was subtle, a redirected glance, a communication unsent, a retainer substituted unannounced, a gathering withdrawn. An interchange relayed to the unsuspected person, a subtle suggestion provided to the sovereign at opportune timing through the preferred voice. These minute modifications restructured a queen's realm in mere weeks. Then there remained the sovereign. A queen's circumstance depended primarily on the sovereign's preference. If he maintained her, she stood protected. Her retainers received financing, her offspring benefited, her position penetrated his inner council, minimally within private chambers. If his preference transformed, redirected toward another female, toward competing political matters, toward a different union, rendering her ancestry problematic, her reality diminished. Sovereign women were dismissed, not perpetually through public rejection, rather via gradual withdrawal of presence, financial resources, and physical contact. A queen forfeiting the sovereign's preference remained queen nominally, yet her designation became hollow. Warfare complicated matters. The sovereign engaged in hostilities, the queen anticipated. She anticipated communications carrying triumph, or communications that reconstructed everything. Sovereign perished fighting. Her survival hinged on successor's temperament. Alternative sovereign, regent, competing forces potentially indifferent to preserving her existence, housing, and acknowledgement. Adversaries occupied her fortress. Her circumstance became ambiguous. Possible ransom, possible detention, possible utilization as leverage for settlement or advantage. Her flesh and reproductive capacity sold for harmony or advancement. The boundaries confining her during tranquility potentially abandoned during upheaval. And pervading everything, perpetual and noiseless, conventional sickness. Fever, sepsis, mysterious illness without origin or endpoint. Healthcare in 1200 merged herbalism, spiritual conviction, and guesswork. Vein draining was customary. Petition happened alongside poultices. Acute affliction meant the best available: recuperation, comfort, warm liquid, and fortune. She recognized this. Residents comprehended it. The menace was not isolated. It was networked dangers encircling her continuously. Reproduction, infection, governance intrigue, hostilities, the sovereign's sentiments, the court's measurement, and the apprehension that her circumstance, however exalted, rested on contingencies beyond her authority. She possessed a circlet, yet the circlet did not guarantee shelter. It guaranteed observation. In a medieval fortress, observation meant its personal hazard. Eventually, when night descended upon the fortress, the reality of the queen's existence felt inescapable. She had traversed the entire rotation, starting with chambers through chapel, starting with chapel through hall, starting with hall through personal space, starting with personal space through garden, starting with garden through feast, and back again. Throughout, she had remained inside the walls. Not atmospheric conditions, not territorial hazard, rather because queens, practically, departed infrequently. The fortress signified her existence. Its passageways meant her passageways. Its courtyard meant her ventilation. Its garden, assuming she possessed one, her landscape. The barriers ascending were not negotiable thresholds. They were permanent limitations of her existence, shifting exclusively when the sovereign authorized relocation. Should the household transitioned to an alternate fortress, an alternate manor, an alternate urban center, she accompanied through military escort, via predetermined routes, at velocities chosen by authorities, toward destinations chosen by authorities. The transfer itself was not liberation. It meant relocation inside the structure, displacement from one stone barrier to subsequent barriers. Inside the fortress,
Her motions were chronicled perpetually. Attendants shadowed her. Sentries stationed themselves at divisions. Employees noted her itineraries, intervals, and associates. Conversation without spectators was nearly unattainable. Partially opened portals, neighboring attendants, nearby scribes, sentries indicating someone would learn everything. Her correspondence underwent management. Communications she composed moved through hands possessing reading ability prior to sealing. Communiques she obtained traversed equivalent channels. Sovereign preference to comprehend her written exchanges. The mechanism enabled comprehension effortlessly. Her personal connections underwent examination. Excessive familiarity with a household generated mistrust. Recurrent exchanges with foreign regencies triggered heightened concerns. Her faith, devotions, charitable distributions, relationship with religious authorities underwent examination for impacts, connections, or self-governance exceeding the court's judgment. She lacked capacity to traverse the fortress entrance, plus mount a horse for countryside riding independently. She could not meet family absent permission. She could not select her own companions without authorization. She lacked determination regarding resting quarters, nutrient selection, temporal parameters, or calendar allocation without the establishment's invisible framework directing every determination. The fortress safeguarded her from territories beyond. Concurrently, it generated isolation from everything outside. When illumination diminished, fire burned to embers, quarters grew frigid, flames dissolved. Beyond shuttered barriers, territories extended in obscurity. Vegetation, timberlands, waterways, municipalities, pathways she had never traversed, illuminated skies she had witnessed exclusively via stone-framed apertures. Attendants settled onto sleeping pallets. The protector positioned himself past the entryway. Fortress acoustics, footfalls, atmospheric movement, quadruped shifts below, closure elsewhere within architectural structure. Completed vacancy with recognizable rhythm, maintaining her position. She reclined in the grandest sleeping platform within the structure, yet the mattress remained incarcerated. To populations beyond, she embodied dominion. Her attire signified prosperity. Her circlet signified command. Her location at the ceremonial meal signified that governance possessed structure, harmony, and divine blessing. Bowing transpired upon her passage. Inclination happened within the sacred space. Her designation, enunciated in governments distant, carried implications of kinship, geography, and succession. Yet concealed by the circlet, her being bore definition via obligation, menace, and barriers she rarely overcome. She roused in a frigid quarter, cleansed in frigid liquid, and encased in textiles selected not for satisfaction, yet for communication. She reverenced because governance demanded it. She managed a retinue examining and supervising simultaneously. She consumed invisibility, conversed invisibility, and grinned invisibility. Because withdrawal, muteness, evident sadness presented repercussions she was powerless to endure. She procreated in an enclosed quarter, apprehensive that enclosure might seal against her. She traversed courts, measuring her usefulness minute by minute, recalibrating devotion, and could disassemble her circumstance through unremarkable institutional precision. She endured in recognition that her welfare depended on an individual's preference, and preference shifted for influences beyond her comprehension. An emergent partnership, an emergent ambition, an emergent rival, an emergent measurement determining her diminished significance versus the prior rotation. Via all of this, she endured. Not resulting from simplicity, but resulting from the sole possibility the fortress supplied. Subsequently, envision medieval queenship differently. Erase imagination of liberty. Picture an individual in that fortress's grandest chamber, outfitted in that kingdom's most elaborate vestment,
encompassed by companions, defended by armament, surveyed by governance, incapable of traversing the partition and departing. That represented queenship in 1200. Incarceration surpassed dominion.